Okay, good morning, distinguished participants. Thank you for joining us today. It is a pleasure to welcome you to CChat number 27. So CChat is a forum where students, especially from the Center for Southeast Asian Social Studies at Universitas Gadjah Mada, discuss and share perspectives toward issues in Southeast Asia. So now let's get down to business. For our topic today is swimming in plastic, an examination into Indonesia's waste management system. So please allow me to introduce our speaker, Alice San. Alice is a second-year student in political science and international relations and anthropology and sociology, University of Western Australia. If you have any questions, please type down in the Zoom question box, or you can ask questions during the Q&A session. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Alice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just get my presentation up. I'm not too sure how to share the screen though, so can you see that?
It's still black. Okay, now it's showing.
It's showing? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining. As Palin said, my name is Alice and I'll be presenting today's topic, which is an examination into Indonesia's waste management system. Although this is online, I would like to acknowledge that for me, the meeting is taking place on the traditional custodians, the Wajak Noongar people. It is important to note that this land was never ceded, so I pay my acknowledgement and respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Just a little introduction and disclaimer. I've spent the last few weeks researching this topic and by no means are an expert or anything, so this is just some research that I thought would be interesting to compile and present. So UN predictions of the world population are set to hit 9.7 billion according to the UN, with waste expected to grow to 3.4 billion tonnes by the same year. This has made waste management becoming a pressing issue for many countries, including Indonesia, as they struggle to deal with current waste levels. According to the UN's Global Waste Management Outlook, the term waste is defined in a very broad sense. As unwanted or discarded materials rejected as useless, unneeded, or excess to requirements. In this scope, this definition can be applied to numerous waste types, such as municipal, industrial, agricultural, and hazardous waste. In this presentation, I will be examining waste management systems in Southeast Asia, in particular Indonesia, looking at current initiatives aimed at combating such issues such as landfills and waste banks, as well as looking at the impact that globalization has had on Indonesia, which heavily contributes to the current waste management issues. As Abdul and Sayafriddin suggest, by their definition, waste is the residual from various of human and animal activities in the form of solid, mud, liquid, or gas, which is no longer useful or needed. I think this definition highlights something that the UN definition doesn't, which is the acknowledgement of that waste, the large quantities of waste that we now see are largely byproduct of human activities. While waste management and its associated problems are a global issue, it is evident that it disproportionately affects lower socioeconomic countries. A culmination of lack of resources, including infrastructure, see to many Southeast Asian and Sub-Saharan African countries sharing the same struggle when it comes to disposing their waste in what is or can be highly urbanized settings. Many of these countries lack a clear waste management program, leading to improper disposals of large quantities of waste. Yet these are the same countries who are responsible for much of the world's manufacturing. With growing amounts of waste and amounts of waste generated from not only industry, but municipal waste, and no long-term sustainable storage and processing solutions in place, this can result in serious environmental impacts such as water, air, and soil pollution, as well as considerable health repercussions. So while preventative actions such as the 3 Rs, the reuse, reduction, and recycle, they remain ideal, it is imperative to acknowledge that sometimes this can be out of reach. And so other solutions have to be made to safely store what can be potentially toxic waste. Failure to implement a decent waste management system can see to a detrimental impact on the environment, as I said before, serious health repercussions. So one of the examples that I found of this improper waste disposal is the Chitterham River. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing wrong. But the Chitterham River, which flows through West Java, has been a casualty of Indonesia's poor waste management system, with nearly 3,000 industries who discharge their wastewater into the stream and millions of people who live along it. It has become one of the dirtiest and most polluted rivers in the world. Due to the sheer amount of people relying on the Chitterham River, it has been forced into channels, canals, and artificial reservoirs to irrigate fields and provide a water supply to those who live along it. This has led to high levels of soil degradation, increasing the potential of landslides in the surrounding areas. Water has also been key to many of Indonesia's industrial growth, such as the textile industry, with water supplied in the with water used by these industries, such as the textile industries, being then fed back into the water as wastewater, which is not properly filtrated. This evident pollution and runoff from general rubbish and industrial waste has also led to issues with water quality and increased levels of microplastics detected. Research back in 2013 found levels of lead in the river at more than 1,000 times the US standard of drinking water. It is important to note that this study was conducted in 2013, but without proper cleanup, I don't think that this statistic has changed. This not only has implications for those drinking it, but also the delicate ecosystem within the river, as mercury and other heavy metals are found in tissues of fish. And since 2008, nearly 60% of the river's fish species has been destroyed. Farmers in the area have also displayed evident health implications, such as skin diseases, thought to be caused by poorly regulated wastewater being dumped back into the river without proper filtration. Unfortunately, not only does the river's pollution affect its immediate environment, but it also contributes heavily to marine and coastal pollution, as it empties out at various points into the Java Sea, making Indonesia the second greatest ocean polluter after China. The president of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, has also created an idealistic goal to make the river water drinkable in a matter of years through a implementation of a cleanup project, which, if successful, has been talked about to be replicated in other heavily polluted waterways. The initiative is largely funded through a 500 million loan from the Asian Development Bank in 2009, which allows a 15-year window for the cleanup. However, while the cleanup effort, if completed, is a remarkable start, there is still much to be done about preventing further deterioration of the Chitterham, and the question of where to store and dispose of the waste is largely unanswered. In the highly populated island of Java, waste management is a constant issue. With the capital of Jakarta home to nearly 10 million people, it produces an enormous amount of waste. One of the solutions that the government has adopted is the use of designated areas to store such waste. These are relatively easy solutions and are also relatively cheap. Most, if not all, local waste is transported to the Bantu landfill, which is one of the world's largest landfills now. It became operational in 1989 and now holds an estimated of 19 million tons of waste. Through this, the Bantu it holds nearly majority of the waste that it holds is unsorted, largely in part due to the fact that Jakarta has no formal household recycling initiative, meaning that the waste at the landfill is a culmination of organic waste and toxic garbage. Through this, the Bantu Gebang saw itself become home to the growing informal economy as scavengers sift through the waste, giving way to the development of a recyclable market. These individuals are subsequently able to take their goods to other actors in this informal sector to sell and earn somewhat a living. It's also important to note that I'm pretty sure the government had a plan to build incinerators in the area to try and provide more room for other waste coming in, but this has stalled in part due to the fact that there are people relying and making a living off of the landfill by scavenging. While it does provide and allow for actors to earn a living, landfills still present a huge environmental risk and health concern. The unenclosed and untreated storage of toxic waste is largely responsible for air and soil pollution in the immediate and surrounding areas of the landfill site, destroying any chance of a flourishing local flora or fauna. Those who work at these scavenging sites are predominantly from low socioeconomic backgrounds, which means that they work through these sites with little to no self-protection attire, leaving them vulnerable to injury, disease, infection, as well as respiratory illnesses. Those who work at scavenging sites often reside close by, cooking and storing food, sleeping and bathing in close proximity to the landfill, all of which have significant health implications. Even with this informal sector of scavengers sifting through and selling recyclable waste, the Bantu Gebang landfill has struggled to keep up with the sheer amount of waste and demand for waste storage. This highlights the need for a more sustainable management system, one which is able to keep up in the context of growing populations and ever increasing amounts of waste. Although landfills such as Bantu Gebangs are a popular solution to growing waste issues, it does not adequately address the concerns about potentially recyclable waste becoming contaminated in landfill. This gives way to a preventative measure and solution in the creation and implementation of waste banks. Like many other Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia has adopted a similar approach towards sustainable waste management systems through the Waste Management Law of 2008, which paved tentative steps for the municipal solid waste management using reduction and waste handling techniques. This increase of waste banks in Indonesia came as an initiative to increase awareness and understanding of waste sorting at the domestic level. And ultimately a strategy to convert waste into financial benefits for the communities involved. This can greatly reduce the amount of waste that arrives at landfill by being able to recycle items such as paper, plastic, glass, and metal before they are contaminated. Thus, while both landfill and waste banks are focused on the management of waste, it is important to acknowledge that they come from different points, one from the perspective of prevention and the other from a solution. So waste management is often seen as the responsibility of local and federal government. However, campaigns and grassroots initiatives have played a large role in getting such topics to the forefront of politicians' minds, as well as capturing the media's attention. So the example that I found was the Bye Bye Plastic Bag initiative, which was founded in 2013 by two teenagers and sisters, Malati and Isabel Widgeson, who were advocating for the cleanup of their home island of Bali. They have now expanded into an international movement advocating for the discontinued use of plastic bags through educational materials and worldwide campaigns. Their campaign was picked up by the local media, and eventually they were granted an audience with the governor of Bali at the time. Pastika subsequently signed a memorandum of understanding with the sisters and worked towards eliminating the use of such plastics by 2018. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much progress made in regards to this. However, the two girls have made strides in bringing such issues to light, educating others about the impacts of plastic and plastic bags on the environment, and also highlighting the importance and the advocacy work and its role in bringing items onto politicians' agendas. While media attention and applying global pressure on governmental agency is a key motivator for action, a lot of the time it is simply instigating for small scale change and does not address the real issue at bay, the key driver for waste production, globalization. Globalization allows for the exploitation of poorer nations by those who are richer and implements the dichotomy of the global north and global south. In this context, I bring up two predominant issues. One is the export of waste abroad, and the other is consumerism. So Indonesia, alongside other Southeast Asian countries such as Malaysia and Thailand, have tried to reduce their waste and improve their waste management systems by preventing the acceptance of contaminated waste, which is shipped from countries abroad. While many Southeast Asian countries have made headlines for poor waste management, they are often the ones who are not only having to deal with their own domestically created waste, but also taking waste from the global north. According to data from the World Bank, 16% of the world's population, high-income countries combined, are generating more than 1/3 or 34% of the world's waste. In some instances, the waste that they accept for other countries has not been sorted properly, with a limited amount that is able to be recycled while the rest is disposed in landfill. Following China's ban on foreign waste in 2017, there was a significant growth in overseas waste being exported to Southeast Asian countries such as Indonesia. It is also important to note that while Indonesia's plastic recycling industry is somewhat reliant on the imports of recyclables, when the waste isn't sorted properly, they can't recycle that, so it just ends up being put in landfill. This increase has taken a toll on Indonesia's already burdened waste management system, leading it to reject waste that cannot be recycled, preventing the country from becoming a dumping ground for overseas waste. This was highlighted by an example that I found in 2019, where Indonesia sent back 8 containers weighing around 210.3 tons, filled with unsorted household waste back to Australia after inspectors declared the material too contaminated to be recycled. As stated previously, waste management is seen as the responsibility of government. However, we are all somewhat responsible for the maintenance of our environment. A key factor in helping waste management issues is changing our consumption behaviours. So while our society is very consumeristic, instead of creating items to last, it encourages the manufacture of goods that will need to be replaced. And this constant consumption allows for fast growth in industry, especially in developing countries, but has detrimental effects on the environment. So using textile industries as a little example, I found that the fast fashion industry is extremely problematic. There's so much waste that is generated, and so many countries in Africa and Southeast Asia, which are have become a dumping ground for discarded textiles. These clothing items a lot of the time decompose over like a very, very long time. They're not very compostable. Which it also has a detrimental impact to the environment, not only in the context of the waste that it generates, but also it promotes highly concentrated farming, which is also very water intensive of cotton, and it also has an environmentally harsh manufacturing process in the dyes and the chemicals it uses. Thus, the question is asked, how do we consume less in a society which, is reliant on consumption? And while we can reuse and recycle, the ultimate solution for preventing an overwhelmed waste management system seems deceptively simple and probably obviously easier said than done, but use less and its consequence waste less. I think it's just important to acknowledge that everyone has to do their bit. And while industries need to be while industries need to be responsible for the waste they create, it is also up to us to make sure that, you know, we follow initiatives, we recycle, and we prevent as much waste from being thrown into landfill. So yeah, that was the end.
Thank you, Alice, for your presentation and wonderful, wonderful insights. So now we are going to have a Q&A session. Do you have any questions to ask Alice? Okay, maybe I will start with my question first then. I think your presentation is really good and wonderful, but I have a question with, do you think the initiatives for the project, like use waste and eat less, is the real solution? Like, can it really solve into the roots of the problem? I know it is
No,
easier
I think
to say.
that's a really good question. I think there needs to be a wide scale systemic change, but I think also it is important to acknowledge that these big corporations are obviously feeding off the big corporations who are, you know, responsible for much of the world's waste. They are feeding into our consumption habits. So a lot of the so while, you know, it's obviously not just the fault of the consumer, but if these big corporations have a target audience, they're obviously selling to an audience, if that makes sense. So I think if we change our consumption habits, even the tiniest bit, they will start to understand and maybe think of more sustainable options if they know that people are going to buy into that. Like, they go where the money goes.
Thank you.
Also leading on to that, I did do a tiny bit of research onto the topic of corporate responsibility, and I think it was a reading on Indonesia saying how the corporate social responsibilities in Indonesia, a lot of the time it is, they say it's mandatory, but I did some readings and apparently it's not enforced, and there's a whole like a lack of clarity surrounding, you know, the laws that are put in place to help regulate environmental impact.
Yeah, I just give my opinion out here, but I feel like, well, I from what I learned that you have to pay for this amount of money that if you do like create a carbon footprint or something, right? And I feel like those corporates, if they have more money, so they can pay just to balance the environment impact that they created. You know what I mean? So it doesn't really help promoting environmental issues to the point that much, because like if you create pollution, you just pay, like use money as a solution, but not
Yeah.
really dig deep to the cause of the issues.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue, especially if they are multi-million dollar corporations. Like, they can pay as much as they want to and they'll earn that money back in a heartbeat. I think I think it's a very multifaceted issue, and it's, as you said, like there's no really like currently there's no workable solution that anyone has put in place. I'm not sure. I know in Australia, in regards to environmental impacts of corporations, we largely rely on mining. And obviously that has a detrimental impact to the environment. I think there's like regulations that you know, after you close your mine, you have to make sure it's environmentally safe. And sometimes they, you know, try and reintroduce that land back into the environment. I'm not too sure whether or not that has, that obviously hasn't been able to put the land back to how it was prior to the mining. But I think that's the biggest step that anyone's taken so far. I think we do need to do a whole lot more. We are heavily reliant on mining and the gas and coal industry, which is a kind of a bit embarrassing to admit. But yeah, I think there's a large growing sector of renewable energy, which hopefully will come out soon.
Any participants would like to ask others any questions? But feel free to do it.
Oh yeah. Hello Alice, I want to ask something. Do you think there is any impact on the waste of plastic in Indonesia? I mean, like the continual impact for the environment itself? Because based on the literature that I read, there is an impact of microplastics of the plastic waste in Indonesia. And how do you think about that?
I also did some readings on it, and I largely based them off and I really hope I've been pronouncing it right, the Chitarum River, the river,
Yeah.
and talking about how the pollution and the runoff, because it meets at several points in the Java Sea, it obviously creates a great impact of marine pollution. And there's been, I think that, I don't know where it is specifically in the Pacific Ocean, but there's basically like a trash island that moves around. And I've seen pictures of, I think it was on Kuta Beach in Bali, where the tide has literally just brought all the rubbish back in. The issues with plastic is major. Not only are there like microplastics found in the ocean, but it's also detrimental to ocean life. I'm sure you've seen like the pictures and videos of turtles and plastic bags and all of that. I also think a large part of it is the fact that it isn't able to decompose properly. And so this plastic that you see floating in the ocean, it's not going to disappear in 10, 15 years. It's going to take a while to decompose, if at all, which means that whatever we put in is just adding to that, unless we find a solution of how we can reuse these plastics. A lot of the time, and in my presentation, I also noted that, you know, recycling is a great initiative, but I think if we're not able to get initiatives in about sorting the waste, a lot of the times recycling centres won't even take contaminated waste, even if it is your plastic and your paper and your glass, that which is usually recycled. If it is contaminated, they can't recycle it anymore. I hope that answered your question. Sorry, I went on a little segue.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. So do you have any initiative or any idea to combat this issue?
I think, like I said before, it's very multifaceted, because I understand, you know, in Australia, we're very lucky, you know, we've got our tap water. We don't need to be using plastics. I usually carry around my like reusable bottle. But I understand, I know when I go back to China, sometimes on holidays, they can't drink out of the tap water. And so they have the water tanks in their house, but if you're out, you have to buy a plastic bottle. You can't just go to a tap and drink it. And so I think this ties into the accessibility of water. Yeah. I
Okay,
think
thanks a lot.
also, I think there needs to be some sort of pressure on these corporations. I know Coca-Cola is a big polluter in terms of plastic, and there has to be some sort of pressure placed on these groups to, do the right thing, because obviously plastic is a lot cheaper for them than to be, making glass bottles or, proper recycling initiatives. So there has to be some sort of pressure either from governments or changes in consumer behavior. But obviously consumers, as I stated before, they might have a variety of reasons why, whether it be to water accessibility or anything like that, where they might have to buy into the plastic bottles.
Right. That answers a lot. Thank you, Alice.
I want to add something. Okay, because I think that the environmental issues is not a big thing in Indonesia and in others developing countries. So yeah, our government do not pay attention to it. So the waste management system in Indonesia is still very bad, but I am very grateful that there are some social movement like among the young generation in Indonesia. We make a campaign not to use the plastic straw, and I do it as well. And then we try to how to say, we try to reduce the plastic consuming, something like that. And also in some provinces in Indonesia, they have already banned the plastic use. Like in Bali, the government, the governor has already issued the law about the banning of single plastic use. But in many provinces, like maybe in 30 other provinces in Indonesia, we still do not force the reduction of the plastic use in Indonesia. And actually back in 2016 in Indonesia, we have the discourses about banning plastic. Yeah, banning plastic, and we have to pay for it if you want to use it. But it's very cheap, like everyone can buy it. Like in Indonesia, it's only 200 rupiah. Yeah, 200 rupiah, or in Thai baht, it's only half baht. It's very cheap. I don't know. I can't compare it to Australian dollars, but yeah, it's very cheap. Maybe it's less than 1 cent, 1 cent Australian dollars. So it's very cheap, and the discourses just ended up without further action by our government. It's just a plan, and then yeah. But I think that the young generation, they pay attention more to the plastic use and then to the environmental issues, but still our government lacks of the action to combat this issue. Yeah.
I think it's this kind of rhetoric is also continued in other governments. I don't think, I think waste issues are obviously bigger or bigger in, like you mentioned, in the Southeast Asian countries. But I think a lot of the acknowledgement that we have to also talk about is the amount of waste that a lot of the high income countries generate. And I mean, I don't know why I didn't know this before, but when Indonesia asked Australia to take back their rubbish, I had no idea. Like, it just didn't make headlines. And so for a long time, until China stopped taking the Australia's waste, Australians didn't even know where their recycling was going. So we have 3 bins in Australia. We have a rubbish bin, we have a green waste bin, and then we have a recycling bin. And we've had that for quite a while, but we don't actually have any kind of abilities to recycle by ourselves at that point in time, but a lot of people didn't know, so they thought that when they were taking their rubbish to recycling, we would be recycling it, but obviously that's not the case if it's been ending up in other countries and it's been made their job to kind of sort through and recycle. So like you said, again, with the plastic bags and the low cost, that's also an issue here. Our supermarkets, most of our major supermarkets have changed to either you bring your own bag or you pay for a bag. But to pay for a bag is not expensive. It's 15 cents maybe. I'm not sure how much that is in rupiah, but it's not much. You can purchase, those reusable bags, but again, like if it doesn't cost much and people are just buying them each time that they go out because they constantly forget, that's not really addressing the issue at hand, which is, to try and cut down. Yeah, so it's definitely not isolated in that.
I get your point, and I think that it's an irony that we are still struggling to recycle our own plastic, and then developed country, they send their own rubbish to us, and yeah, it's very bad. And then
I watched a documentary. It was about the fast fashion industry and talking about how all these countries in Southeast Asia, like especially like Bangladesh, creating all these cheap items of clothing, and yet they're the ones who basically receive it back when the Western countries have like used it and then thrown it out, and they get stuck with the items that they manufactured and they have to recycle or dispose of it. So there's just these mountains of clothing waste, which I think is deplorable on our part. Like a lot of people can probably afford to have more sustainable options, but because of this constant idea that you need the newest fashion, or you need a new dress for this event, it kind of this whole society is built around needing or wanting more, which I think is in part to a large reason for the current waste issues.
yeah, I agree with you. It's like a systematic problems, in my opinion,
Definitely.
because from our government, and our government from others developing countries, they still don't regulate about the waste recycling and so on, and also from the society, from the people, they care less about the environment issues, and the education system as well. We are not taught to, like to filter, or to filter the plastic waste and something like that. So I think that, yeah, it's very difficult for me to change or to make a new action that will be adopted by the whole system, from the government, society, and other parties. Yeah.
I think I do just want to acknowledge though that I am very fortunate with the fact that my last slide was about using less and as a consequence wasting less. I think that comes from a quite privileged perspective. Obviously, if you can buy sustainable items, you should, but a lot of the time they are at a higher cost than the cheaper alternatives, and people sometimes simply just cannot afford to be sustainable or to purchase items which are maybe better for the environment. So I also think that has to be acknowledged, that we can say like, oh, you have to do your bit and purchase sustainable items, or maybe don't shop fast fashion as an example, but because they are quite a bit cheaper than sustainable alternatives, you're asking someone to purchase probably the same quality at $3 or $10, $3 or $30. If they're struggling, they're going to have to pick the $3 option. So I think, as you said, it's a very multifaceted issue, and it calls for kind of wide scale systematic change.
Yeah, and one more. I think that uh, sustainable living is such a privilege, especially in developing countries. And being able to live a sustained living lifestyle, I think, yeah, it's a privilege for us here in developing countries. And people in developed countries, they have to take it very serious because, yeah, they are already privileged. Yeah, thanks.
I think the idea of sustainability is quite interesting because like those who are poor, they are the most sustainable people, I think, because they use everything, they reuse everything. I know when I go back to China, they take their plastic bags home and they use them to do whatever, and then they take them shopping, and then when they break, they use it as like a trash bag or clothing. They hand them down to other kids. Whereas in the West, it's kind of become this like performative action. So like you can say, "Oh, my brand's sustainable," as if people from who have had no other option but to kind of reuse haven't been doing that for the past however long. Like the sustainability movement is largely like as it stands today um, is like a somewhat of a marketing strategy, I think, for a lot of companies.
Yeah, but the problem is we are heading to the West. Yeah, we try to adopt the Western lifestyle. So yeah, I think that's one of the problem. Thanks for the discussion. It's a very fruitful discussion with you, Alice. Okay, I'll give it back to Bailey.
If there is no any question, then we will proceed with the closing remarks. So today we learned and examined a lot of issues regarding to waste management system. And I would like to thank Alice for presentation. It's been wonderful with the full of insights. Like that's so wonderful. Yeah, so we would like to thank all the distinguished participants for joining and hope to see you guys with our new C chat or our new coming events. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay.